In the middle of the bloodiest ocean war in human history, there was a ship that refused to fight. While battleships roared and skies burned with enemy fire, one silent giant moved through the Pacific, painted pure white, marked with enormous red crosses, and carrying no weapons at all. Inside, doctors and nurses worked around the clock, not to kill, but to save. And not just their own men, but enemy soldiers too. Imagine it, American medics bending over wounded Japanese prisoners, men who, just hours earlier, might have tried to destroy them. Here, hatred had to be set aside. Here, mercy was the mission. But in a war where rules were often ignored, this floating hospital became a target, and every journey through open waters was a gamble between life and sudden destruction. This is the astonishing story of the Mercy ship that treated enemies in World War II. World War II was a conflict defined by brutality, revenge, and the belief that the enemy was less than human. Across the Pacific, battles turned entire islands into graveyards, and mercy was a luxury no one expected to find. Yet, in the middle of this unforgiving ocean, America launched something the world had never seen before, a hospital ship whose mission challenged the very logic of war. Unlike the destroyers and carriers surrounding it, this ship carried no guns, launched no planes, and fired no torpedoes. It sailed with a different kind of power, the belief that every life, even an enemy life, deserved a chance. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers stepped aboard knowing they would face not just wounded bodies, but the painful weight of treating men who belonged to the other side. But the strangest part? Even though international law protected hospital ships, many commanders didn't trust those rules. And the Pacific was filled with submarines that didn't always follow them. So how did this floating sanctuary operate in a war where mercy could get you killed? And why did America choose compassion at a time when the world was drowning in hatred? This is where the story truly begins. By the early 1940s, the Pacific Ocean had transformed into one of the most unforgiving battlegrounds the world had ever seen. Island after island became arenas of fire, steel, and suffering. American Marines fought through dense jungles, unforgiving heat, and relentless enemy resistance. Every mile gained was paid for in blood. And on the other side, Japanese soldiers, trained to fight to the last breath, defended every patch of land with unbroken ferocity. But behind these violent clashes was another silent crisis, the wounded. Battles weren't just destroying armies, they were overwhelming medical systems. Soldiers bled out on beaches because field medics couldn't reach them. Hospitals on nearby islands were overcrowded, undersupplied, and constantly under threat. Stretchers filled every hallway. Doctors performed surgeries without sleep. Infection spread faster than rescue. America needed a solution, a way to treat massive numbers of casualties far from the front, yet safe from enemy fire. And so the idea of a floating hospital became more than just a concept, it became a necessity. Meanwhile, the Pacific was not like Europe. In this theater, the rules of war were murkier, trust non-existent, and the hatred between soldiers far deeper. Prisoners were rare. Surrender was viewed as dishonorable. Many Japanese troops preferred death over capture. And American forces, hardened by the brutality they witnessed, often saw the enemy as an unstoppable, merciless force. So when the United States announced it would create ships, completely unarmed, dedicated solely to saving lives, it felt almost surreal. These vessels would rescue and treat not only American troops but also wounded Japanese soldiers, blurring the boundaries between enemy and human. Yet these hospital ships would sail into waters patrolled by submarines, aircraft, and destroyers that didn't always care about the red crosses painted on their hulls. This was the world into which the Mercy ship was born, an ocean ruled by violence, and a war where compassion itself was a dangerous act. It was unlike any ship the U.S. Navy had ever sent into a war zone. While destroyers bristled with guns and aircraft carriers thundered with engines of war, this vessel seemed almost out of place. Painted a bright, unmistakable white, so white it reflected the sun like a beacon, and marked with massive red crosses on every side, it moved through the Pacific like a ghost of peace drifting through an ocean of violence. This was the Mercy ship. The moment a soldier stepped aboard, he entered a completely different world. Gone were the sounds of artillery and the smell of burning fuel. Instead, the corridors carried the scent of antiseptic, clean sheets, and hope. The ship held operating rooms equipped with advanced medical instruments, recovery wards with rows of beds, a pharmacy, sterilization rooms, and hundreds of trained staff ready to work day and night. At the heart of this floating sanctuary were its people. Surgeons who could amputate a limb in minutes to save a life. Nurses who stayed awake for days, comforting men who cried out for their mothers. Pharmacists, anesthetists, radiologists, and volunteers who left the safety of home to serve on the front lines of compassion. Every person on board had accepted a startling responsibility, treating anyone who needed help, even if that man had been firing at American troops only hours earlier. But despite its peaceful mission, the Mercy ship was not invincible. It sailed unarmed. No cannons. No escorts at times. Just white paint and red crosses, symbols meant to protect it under the Geneva Convention. But in the Pacific, where desperation and distrust often outweighed international law, these symbols were far from guaranteed safety. Many officers doubted the enemy would respect those crosses. Some feared the ship would become a perfect target, a slow, bright white silhouette visible miles away. And crews knew that if a submarine decided to attack, they had no way to fight back. Yet the ship sailed anyway. Because its purpose was bigger than survival. It carried a mission that defied the very essence of war. To save lives, not take them. To heal wounds, not inflict them. To show mercy where none was expected. And soon, this ship would face its first real test. When the Mercy ship set out on its first mission, the crew didn't know what to expect. They had trained in clean Navy hospitals, practiced emergency drills, and studied medical procedures, but none of them had truly faced the chaos of real war casualties. They were prepared for wounded American Marines, but they weren't prepared for the emotional storm that would come with treating the enemy. The first mission begins. The call came at dawn. A fierce battle on a nearby island had left hundreds injured. The ship's calm interior erupted into controlled urgency. Nurses tightened their gloves, surgeons prepared their tools, and corpsmen organized triage stations on the deck. When the first boats approached, the crew saw a sight they would never forget. Stretcher after stretcher carried young men, some with missing limbs, some burned, some barely conscious. Many were American, covered in sand and dried blood, uniforms torn from combat. Their faces showed everything from pain to relief as they realized they were finally safe. But behind the Americans came something that made everyone freeze. Another group of stretchers, this time carrying Japanese soldiers. Some were prisoners. Some had been found barely alive on the battlefield. Some had surrendered only because they could no longer move. And though they were enemies, they bled the same red blood, cried out in the same agony, and clung to life with the same desperation. The order from the ship's commander was simple, but heavy. Treat them. All of them. For a moment, no one spoke. The nurses looked at each other, unsure. Some doctors clenched their jaws. War had taught them to fear the enemy, to resent them, even to hate them. Now they had to save them. But training prevailed over emotion. One by one, they lifted the enemy aboard. And in that moment, though small and quiet, a line was crossed that defied the very purpose of the war. The emotional conflict. Inside the operating room, the air felt heavier than usual. A Japanese soldier, barely 18, lay on the table. A bullet had shattered his leg, and infection was spreading. The surgeon knew the only chance was amputation. As he prepared the instruments, he hesitated, not because of the injury, but because this boy was the age of his own son. What was he doing here? Why was he fighting? And why did this war turn children into enemies? The nurse assisting him whispered quietly, "He's just a kid." The doctor nodded, swallowed hard, and began the procedure. Hours later, the boy was alive, because the Mercy ship had chosen compassion over vengeance. But not everyone handled it easily. In the recovery ward, some American soldiers stared angrily when Japanese troops were placed near them. One Marine, his arm freshly bandaged, asked, "Why are they here? Why save them? They wouldn't save us." The nurse gently replied, "Maybe that's the point. Someone has to start being human again." These moments became the soul of the Mercy ship, moments where hatred slowly cracked, replaced by something unexpected, understanding. See, a high-stakes encounter. Days later, while the ship sailed to its next rescue zone, the ocean seemed unnaturally calm. The horizon was empty. The sky was clear. But deep below the waves, danger was stalking them. A Japanese submarine had been reported nearby, one known for attacking anything that moved, rules of war or not. The crew tightened their routines. Lights were dimmed. Watches doubled. But even then, they knew that if the submarine found them, they had no weapons, no armor, only faith in the red crosses painted across the hull. At midnight, the first hint came, the deep hum of sonar picking up something large under the water. The ship's captain stared at the radar. The shape was long, thin, and moving fast. A submarine. A whisper spread across the decks, fear creeping into every corner. Nurses paused their rounds, listening to the strange silence. Doctors exchanged worried glances in the operating room. Even the wounded sensed something was wrong. The ship slowed. Engines hummed softly, trying not to give away their position. Minutes turned into hours. Then suddenly, without warning, the ocean erupted. A periscope broke the surface, slicing through the water only a few hundred meters away. The crew froze. The captain ordered signal lights flashed, Red Cross ship, NO arms, medical vessel. The Japanese submarine circled, its dark silhouette slipping in and out of the moonlight. It felt like a predator studying helpless prey. Inside the wards, patients gripped their sheets. One American whispered, "They're going to sink us." "I know it." The submarine drifted closer. Then, it stopped. For a long, breathless moment, it simply floated there, watching. And finally, slowly, it submerged and disappeared into the depths. The Mercy ship exhaled as one. They lived. Their mission would continue. Some later believed the sub's captain spared them because he saw the wounded enemies aboard. Others claimed it was the honor code of naval officers. No one ever knew for sure. But on that night, the Mercy ship survived because someone chose mercy over destruction. Human moments that changed everything. Among the many rescued was a Japanese pilot found drifting on wreckage after his plane was shot down. When brought aboard, he expected torture or death. Instead, he was given water, food, and a clean bed. For days, he refused to speak. He turned his face away whenever Americans entered. But slowly, he began to understand, these people were not here to kill him. One nurse, who had lost her own brother earlier in the war, tended to him without fail. She adjusted his bandages, spoke kindly, and even tried teaching him simple English words like water and pain. One evening, he finally said something unexpected. "Why, help me?" She paused, then answered softly. "Because war doesn't decide who deserves kindness." The pilot bowed weakly, tears in his eyes. This scene repeated across the ship. Soldiers who thought they had no reason left to trust anyone found comfort in the hands of strangers. Bitterness softened into humanity. The war outside still raged, but inside the ship, healing was happening in more ways than one. The turning point. The most defining moment came during a massive amphibious assault months later. Casualties were overwhelming. Boats of wounded poured toward the Mercy ship from every direction. American, Australian, Philippine scouts. Even Japanese survivors clinging to debris. The medical staff worked 48 hours straight. Blood stained their uniforms. Their hands shook from exhaustion. But they refused to stop. Then something extraordinary happened. 2 American stretcher-bearers approached the ramp, not carrying an American Marine, but a severely wounded Japanese officer. One of the doctors asked, "Where'd you find him?" A Marine replied, "He was screaming for help. Doesn't matter what uniform he wore." That moment symbolized everything the Mercy ship stood for. Not which side you fought on. Not what language you spoke. Just the simple fact that you were human and in pain. By the end of that mission, the ship had treated thousands, including more enemy soldiers than anyone ever expected. The final impact. As stories of the Mercy ship spread, something unusual began happening. Enemy radio broadcasts acknowledged it. American newspapers wrote about it. The world started seeing a different side of a brutal war. By the end of its service, the ship had saved tens of thousands of lives, many of them young men who never imagined the enemy would show compassion. Some Japanese survivors later said that their views of Americans changed forever because of this ship. Letters from former patients arrived years after the war, thanking the doctors and nurses who had saved them. The Mercy ship had done more than treat wounds, it had preserved humanity in a time designed to destroy it. For those serving on the Mercy ship, the greatest battle wasn't fought with bullets or scalpels, it was fought inside their own hearts. Every day, the crew faced a moral conflict that few soldiers in World War II ever experienced. They weren't simply treating wounded men, they were treating the same enemy who, on land or sea, might have killed their friends only hours before. It created a tension that lingered in the air like an unspoken question. How do you show compassion to someone taught to hate you? Some American medics struggled deeply with this. They remembered comrades lost in ambushes, air raids, or brutal island fights. Saving the enemy felt unnatural, almost a betrayal. Yet when the wounded Japanese men were laid before them, stripped of weapons, stripped of uniforms, stripped of everything except pain, something changed. War teaches soldiers to see enemies. Medicine teaches doctors to see humans. The ship became a place where these two forces collided every day. One doctor later wrote in his journal, "I treated a Japanese soldier today whose wounds were so severe I doubted he would live. But when he gripped my hand and whispered thank you through tears, I realized he was no different from the boys on our side." Moments like these transformed the atmosphere aboard the ship. Nurses learned to comfort men who did not speak their language but understood their kindness. Surgeons saved lives without asking which flag the patient once fought under. And slowly, something powerful emerged, proof that even in the darkest chapters of history, humanity can still survive. Because on this ship, mercy wasn't just a mission. It became a quiet rebellion against the cruelty of war. As the final months of the war approached, the Mercy ship had already sailed thousands of miles across the Pacific, braving storms, submarines, air raids, and the emotional weight of saving lives on both sides of the conflict. Its decks had seen more suffering, and more hope, than anyone ever imagined when it first left the American coast. By the time Japan surrendered in 1945, the ship was carrying its last group of wounded survivors. Many were too weak to stand. Others were finally strong enough to walk the corridors they once entered on stretchers. Some were American Marines heading home. Others were Japanese prisoners preparing for uncertain futures. But all of them shared a strange bond, one born not from battle, but from healing. When the ship reached its final port, the crew stood together on deck. They watched as the last patients were carefully taken ashore. Nurses fought back tears. Surgeons who had grown hardened by endless operations finally allowed themselves a moment of release. The war was ending, but the memories of what this ship had done would never fade. Many of the staff returned to civilian life, carrying a deeper understanding of humanity than they ever expected to find in wartime. Some continued their medical careers. Others never practiced again, unable to forget the faces of the men they saved. The ship itself was eventually decommissioned. Its white paint faded. Its red crosses chipped away. But its legacy, saving tens of thousands, including the enemy, remained untouched. In the story of World War II, few vessels changed anything. But this ship changed hearts. As the Mercy ship slowly disappeared from the world's oceans, its story slipped quietly into history, overshadowed by the explosions, victories, and tragedies that defined World War II. But for the men who lived because of it, and for the crew who dared to serve compassion in a time ruled by hatred, its legacy remained unforgettable. Long after the war ended, survivors, American and Japanese alike, would tell their children about the strange white ship that saved them. They remembered the soft glow of its lamps, the gentle hands of its nurses, the determination of its surgeons, and the feeling of waking up to discover that the people caring for them were supposed to be their enemies. In a world divided by flags, borders, and ideologies, this ship proved something powerful. That humanity does not vanish in war, it simply waits for someone brave enough to keep it alive. The guns of World War II eventually fell silent. The ships rusted. The uniforms were packed away. But the mercy shown aboard that floating hospital, those moments of kindness in the heart of chaos, became a reminder of what humans can choose to be. And as the Pacific waves swallowed the ship's fading wake, one truth remained. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is compassion.